plan communications, planning communications in projects, which is part of the planning process group. In my previous video where we talked in detail about the stakeholder management, I mentioned that I'll be discussing this particular process in my next video simply because of the very, very close relationship it has to stakeholder management and also the importance of it overall to the whole project. The project manager, as you know, spends 99.9% of his time communicating in one way or the other as far as the project is concerned, because you're there to deliver a project with your project management team. People have to know about the project, so somehow at any point in time you are actually communicating or preparing something to communicate out to your variety of stakeholders. So in this particular video, we're going to be talking about our main output for the plan communication management process itself, which is the communication management plan. We're going to be going through the types of communication there are. We're also going to be talking about the characteristics or pretty much the models of communication out there. I will discuss obviously the outputs, the inputs, the tools and technique in line with the PMP study guide and the syllabus, and go through a series of other things around why do we communicate, so we kind of have a broad and open view of what communication is. So communication, like I mentioned in my previous video, I see it as the bloodline or the blood flow in the entire body of the project, whereas the stakeholder is pretty much the heart. So you can ask me, where does the organizational strategy comes in? It's the brain, because that's where the thought comes in, that's where the strategy comes from. So organizational strategy, organizational objectives is the brain, and then sends information to the heart for it to actually understand exactly what's going on and to manage the expectations and get that stuff, which is the stakeholders. And then you have the blood flow of communication, which, as you can see, blood runs through entire 100% of the body, and the blood stops at any point in time anywhere. Everything else could potentially calm down. So communication management is extremely important. I will quickly go straight to actually, according to the PMP guide, read out exactly what plan communications management is. It says plan communication management is the process of developing an appropriate approach with plans and plan for project communications based on what? Stakeholders information needs, their requirements, and available organizational assets. The key benefits of this process is that it defines and documents the approach to communicate most effectively and efficiently with stakeholders. Okay, and that is what plan communication management is. So at the end of the day, it takes us exactly back to what I mentioned. Stakeholders. Remember, stakeholders is not just the senior managers, it's the 3 tiers of stakeholders: the managers, your project management team, your colleagues, and people outside the project. For example, the society, the community, or the legal body outside, or auditors, or whoever it may be. And that is how you want to know exactly what the requirements are, and then ensure that you have the right type of communication for them. So without going and drifting away completely out of, and I'll try and stick with this obviously for lack of time. And what we'll just do basically is just go straight very quickly to what the PMP guide is about as far as communication, and then we can delve into each aspect in more detail. As you know, we're talking about the plan communication management or plan communication management knowledge area, and the output, natural output, is going to be the communications management plan, right? And to do that, what do you need, right? What are the kind of documents or artifacts you may look for in order to plan communications? You're going to need the stakeholder register, because at that point in time, remember, in the stakeholder, you try to determine who, where, what, the communication requirements, what kind of information they want, what do they want, how do they want it, and all that stuff. Here, you can understand exactly what the stakeholder requirements are as far as designing and writing out your communication management plan. You're also going to look obviously at the stakeholder management plan to further elaborate on what you might have seen in the stakeholder register. You also obviously have the project management plan, which if you're not already elaborating on the project management plan by inserting information around the communication management plan, you could actually look at that as well to further work on your communication management plan. And naturally, you have the enterprise environmental factors, which are again things that are pretty much outside your control, and the OAPs, policies, templates that you might use. Now, this is where we're going to delve into a lot more detail as to what communication is all about. Okay, the tools and techniques there are the communication methods, the communication models, the communication technology, and the communication requirement analysis meetings and which you can facilitate. Now, let's roll all that back and go pretty much back to the beginning. Communication is communication. You can only plan for communication so much because you never really know what you're going to be hit by or what you're going to be hit with. But having said that, you still have to have some kind of plan in place. You still have to have something that you can walk by or work with that actually you measure by or that guides you on communication itself or what kind on how you communicate and what you communicate and when you communicate it. That is why we have the communication management plan in as far as the PMI standards are concerned. Communication in itself can come in many shapes or form, but they would normally be within these three areas. They could be verbal, like I'm speaking now, speaking to a colleague, face to face, over the phone, in a teleconference, or whatever it may be. They could be written, as we all know. We all send emails today, we all text, we all send WhatsApp or anything, link messages, Skype, and all that stuff, where we can actually send messages in our Skype or actually talk to them verbally as well. And it could be non-verbal. Our body language, our paralingual languages, whereby we don't say a lot, but the look that we have on our face or the kind of body language we have could say a lot, even more than we're actually saying. They say silence is golden sometimes. So as a result, you have those three main types of communication. But in that context, right, where you have the verbal or the written, it could be formal or informal. The formal ones are the ones that are pretty much contractual, whereby depending on who you're dealing with, the nature of the communication and all that, you want to make sure it is as official and as serious and seriously as possible. And in most of those cases, those are pretty much written hard copy documents. Okay, the informal types are the ones whereby it could just be a conversation, it could be an email, it could be a text, it could be just you write something, draft something on a piece of paper and pass it on to the next person and all that. But the situation will warrant the type of communication you have. You can have informal written, you can have a formal written, you can have informal verbal, and you can have a formal verbal conversation as well. Again, really it's a no-brainer. As a project manager, you should know when to get serious and when not to get serious. But do not take anything for granted and just, in most cases, go informal all the time or go too formal too often of the time. So really, from the PM's point of view, be careful. But from the exam point of view, know that those types of communication exists. Now, let's go to the characteristics of communication, right? Communication, as important as it is, has many facets. It can be clear and concise, and it's easily understood. It can be unclear, and people don't have a clue what you're talking about. Okay, and it can be clear, unclear. Either way, it could be misunderstood, and it can be understood as well. And finally, it could be understood. So really, communication has those facets, and That falls under the technique where you have the communication models. Generally speaking, any type of communication involves a sender sending a sort of message. Okay? That message in itself is what you call encoded. Okay? However I send it, it's encoded in the way I understand it to pass it on. Okay? It could be a verbal, it could be an email, it could be not even non-verbal. Now, when that message is transmitted along the lines, anything that distorts or affects that message getting to its destination in a proper way, in the way I have sent it so that it can be understood, is called noise, according to the PM standards. It's called noise, it's a distortion, okay? That's noise. So understand that anything that interferes with communication from one end to the other, from the sender to a receiver or multiple receivers, it is noise. It could be anything, but anything that distorts it is noise. Now, when it gets to the other side, the receiver will then decode the information. Okay, transmitted will then decode the information. Okay, and then acknowledge back to the sender that I have received it. There's some kind of acknowledgement through sending the email back, through saying something back, through eye contact, nodding your head, or whatever it may be, to say that I have received the information. And finally, give some kind of feedback to the sender. So there are areas of responsibility here. The sender is responsible for sending a message and ensuring that it is transmitted to the receiver. The receiver, on the other hand, has a responsibility to acknowledge and feedback that message back to the sender. So you have to be clear on the exams who has and who is responsible for which aspect of any communication model. That is one tool in which you need to understand and use in your communication management plan. It's easily, to be honest, it has happened to me in the office personally, where you send an email and you don't get a response. Okay, well, you can say it's not quite my responsibility for them because you sent the email. But it's actually, when I thought about this, I said, you know what, I better get clarity from this particular stakeholder to make sure they've got my message and understood exactly what we said, because I don't want any surprises. And I was quite glad I did that, because I then got my response and was able to file that away as a response towards that particular issue or towards that particular topic of discussion. So it's very good, it's very, 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 very useful for you to know that messages are transmitted and have to be decoded and they have to be acknowledged. So even if you don't get the acknowledgement, go chasing for an acknowledgement and a feedback and understanding of the situation. They're still responsible to give it to you, even if you go and chase for it. And that is talking about that communication model, as far as that tool and technique is concerned in writing out the communication management plan. Now, communication methods, right? Again, we're in a world whereby technology has taken over, and which obviously hopefully helps us to have a variety of choices on how we communicate. We can use one or more of different types of communication, and also depend on the type and numbers of people we need to communicate to. And you can actually do an interactive communication whereby it's face to face, you're in the meeting room or you're in a teleconference and you're basically exchanging information literally on the spot. You get through the whole of the model on the spot. You encode, you transmit, you decode, you acknowledge, you get feedback pretty much on the spot. That is what you call an interactive method of communication. You also have what you call the push type of communication. The push type of communication is used when you actually need to get out to a certain number of people, maybe not a large number, but a small number or a relatively medium-sized amount of people, i.e. maybe people you need to report to on a regular basis, like your status reports, or certain stakeholders who want, specific type of information at a specific time, and in terms of the frequency as well. You could email, copy basically. You could email any type of communication you need to them. For example, you're emailing reports to them. So you basically push the communication out. You prepare it, and then it's pushed out to them for them to receive and basically, get whatever updates they need. And finally, you have what you call the pull type communication. The pull type communication is if you have to reach large audiences, which even sometimes even goes past geographical boundaries. And the best way to do this is to put this into a central location, i.e. an intranet page or a SharePoint site, somewhere on the cloud, somewhere on the internet, so that everyone can see the information. For example, let's not look outside the context of a project. The news. If I want to read the news today, what do? I go straight onto the internet, type in my website, news.co.uk or whatever it may be, and I pull the information out to read the news I want to read. And that is how pull information type method works in communication. So you can actually define what method of communication is actually appropriate for a particular stakeholder or a particular type of project, depending on the size, the complexity of the project. Remember, the project management plan designs the approach and the process in which you're going to use. Hence, in the communication management plan, which is a subsidiary of the project management plan, would design or will be able to define exactly what communication method is good at certain times of the project. Okay, so that's that about that. Communication technology, I'll talk a little bit more about that at a later stage. And you have the communication requirements analysis, which really, to be honest, you do this in line with the stakeholder register. Okay, you do that with stakeholder because the stakeholder register contains pretty much exactly what the stakeholder requires and when they require it. So you do those two bits in tandem, and then use any of these methods, models, or the communication technology to actually basically deal with your plan for communication. Right. What I want to go into is, why do we communicate? I should have said that earlier on, but I actually just gave you a background of the methods, the models in advance, so that I can comfortably sit down and talk about why would we communicate in a project. If you hear the word communication in a project, first of all, your mind goes straight to what? Reports. But that's not really the only thing that we communicate for. We communicate for many reasons. We can communicate, to probe questions and to seek ideas. Okay? We can communicate to educate other people and to furnish stakeholders of what's going on and to educate them about the project, to sell the project in order to be able to get their support. We could do it because we're trying to find some facts and get to the bottom of certain things. We could do it because we want to manage the expectations and set the expectations of the project manager. We can use it for reporting. I'll go back into that. We can use it for persuading people in order to be able to help us and to be on the side as well. We can use it to motivate and to coach our project team. We can use it to negotiate. We can use it to resolve conflict. So communication is very, very important and very akin to the interpersonal skills that we would have learned or that we would have read in my, in our books or watched in my previous or very early on, like in video 1 or video 2 itself. It's very, very important to understand that communication is not just about reports, but it's about every single thing that you do in order to get your project moving forward. Reporting. I said I'll go back into that. Reporting, obviously, the three types of reports that you could potentially do in a project. You have a status report, which tells you exactly at one point in time what's happening to the project, which is elaborate type of report on what's happening. You could report on the cost, you could report on the time, you could report on the schedule, you could report on the issues, you could report on the risk. It's quite a detailed report of the project. You also have what you call a progress report, which could probably tell you, okay, this is where we are, we've gone 10% or 20% of the time, and pretty much very quick overview of exactly where the project is at that point in time. And finally, you could have what you call the focus report, which will tell you and give you an idea of how far back or far forward the project is to completing exactly what's going to happen, or gives you an indication of what needs to be done in order to be able to meet the project the targets or the constraints that have been set by the project itself. Okay, let me quickly pick up the book and talk about communication technology, because I made that I left that on purpose because I wanted to actually read from the book. It says communication technology is simply the methods used to transfer information among project stakeholders, right? And this may vary significantly. And the choice of the technology you use depends on what? The urgency of the actual information, the availability of the technology, how easy it is for you to use the technology, the overall project environment and organizational structure, and also, more importantly, the sensitivity and the confidentiality of the information. So, as you can see, the communication method and the communication technology are very closely related. If the documents you're saying are perhaps legal and sensitive, you want to encrypt them, you have to have within the organization the ability to be able to encrypt data. Okay? If they need to get to it urgently, right, you need to be able to have the choice to be able to push which have the technology available to be able to push the email to them. If it's large files and your emails would only allow small files through, that's not good. You have to find a way to make that happen, and perhaps put it in a central location, and then sending them a link to pull the information down may be the best way forward. So you have to be able to consider the technology that you have in your environment and how easy it is for the end users to be able to use it, and obviously yourself, the project management team, or easy it is for the stakeholders in general to be able to use that technology in order to be able to get the information that they need. That was why I actually left that, because I wanted to touch that in a bit more detail so that you understand exactly how important it is for you to consider the technology you have. Questions around tools and technique in the PMP exam can be very sneaky because they're very related to stakeholder communication. So you need to know exactly what they're trying to talk about, because sometimes when you update some information in a communication management plan, it's actually reflected in the stakeholder management plan as well. So if you read through that, try and make sure you make note of that. They're very closely related, and hence any project document updates that you might have done could be reflecting on some documents that you've actually modified in the stakeholder management knowledge area itself. Now, going back to my formula for actually aligning or helping to be able to develop a communication management plan is: one, we go through the knowledge areas. Integration. How do we integrate communication across the whole board, across managing the project and executing and directing the project, or across the overall execution, across the overall monitoring and control, and across the whole the closure? How do we manage communication? That's in the scope. In the scope, who do we communicate to? What do we communicate to around the scope of the project? Who, what, when? Do you understand? If there's a change, who, what, when? Again, same thing and time. Who do we communicate to? Who has the powers around, who has anything to do with the time or the urgency of the project, of the the products that is required, who has the authority to deal with that, or who will it affect in terms of time, who do we need to communicate to in terms of quality, who do we need to communicate to in terms of risk, who do we need to communicate to in terms of human resources, procurement, stakeholders, and cost. So you find out that every single knowledge area has an effect one way or the other on its brothers and sisters in terms of their other knowledge areas and specialties. They all work in tandem, irrespective of how you have actually tailored your project. Whatever processes you decided to use, they will all always interact with each other. Before I close, I've got maybe 1 or 2 minutes left. I want to actually tell you what the communication management plan is. It says the communication management plan is a component of the project management plan that describes how project communications will be planned, structured, monitored, and controlled. The plan contains the following: stakeholder communication requirements, information to be communicated, including language, format, content, and level of detail, reason for the distribution of that information, the time frame and frequency of the information, who is responsible for communicating what and when, who are the people authorized to release that type of information, who are the groups of persons that will receive the information, what kind of technologies do you use, who are the resources allocated to communication activities. Remember, the pinball guide is about big projects, not the little ones that we might be doing in our offices today, but we're talking about big. Look at the there may be something that is countrywide, which will be a massive project going on, as it were. Who's going to be communicating to the rest of the world? Who's going to be communicating to different people around the world? There may be people that you have to set that are responsible for communication itself. If there's a problem in communication, who do you escalate to? And then obviously in communication, you write a document or you do anything. They might be using some kind of terms and terminologies, or you might be using some acronyms that are not necessarily known by everyone. Obviously, you need to make sure that the communication management plan includes how that is managed. What are the full meanings of any words or terms and terminologies that are being used in communicating, so that when the information is decoded, it is actually understood, and then you can get a positive feedback. So, and finally, what can actually affect communication, so that you can ensure that you can monitor and control that effectively, and make sure that you can fix any potential problems that do come up. Okay? It's a formula for you to understand what your communication burden is. Okay? The project manager would need to know exactly, or have an idea of, oh my goodness, how many stakeholders do I have, and what does that mean in terms of the communication channels, and how many people will I need to consider to communicate to. And the formula for that is the number of stakeholders, right? N minus 1 divided by 2. So for argument's sake, if we have 4 stakeholders, including the project manager himself in a project, it will be 4 times 4 minus 1 divided by 2. Now, this is where it's easy for anyone to get it wrong, which is why I'm going to go through this. Many of you may not remember, but in mathematics, there's something called BODMAS or BMAS, okay? You deal with anything in brackets first, if brackets exist. So in this case, it will be 4 times 3, so 4 minus 3, right? 4 minus 1, which gives you 3, which then gives you 12, okay? And then you got the O's, you don't want to worry about that. Then you have the divisions itself. Yeah, you deal with anything that has to do with divisions first as well. So in that case, say for argument's sake, you wanted to do it now, you can't do this 2 first because it involves both of them. Otherwise, you're going to have to do 4 divided by 2 and 3 divided by 2. So the best bet is to go on to do the multiplication, which is 12, and then 2 divided by 12 will give you 6. So you get 6 communication channels. So basically, that is how you work out that formula. Remember, when you work out the number of communication channels, you need to consider yourself as a project manager, as a stakeholder, and you need to include yourself in it. I hope that kind of covers everything on communication management. Obviously, between pages 4 to 7 and 443 of the Pinball Guide talks a great deal about the planning process groups and the processes within the planning process group before you go into the individual knowledge areas to talk about them in more detail. What I just wanted to notice is we've talked about stakeholder management, we talked about communication management, and in all cases, we tend to have project document updates as outputs because they all interact with each other. By the time we start talking more about the other ones, then it gets a bit more complex where you then have more outputs coming out of that. Have a nice day and thank you. Bye.